Well, I appreciate everybody joining us. We've got a pretty good quorum here, so we can get started. And I think you guys are going to be pretty excited with our guest. It's Nick from 30 Minutes to President's Club. And he's going to talk to us today about something we all need to do. We all need to learn how to get better at opportunity management. And if you have heard of 30 Minutes to President's Club, feel free. Just drop that in the chat. Make sure you drop your LinkedIn. We want to hear from you. And again, last time I pubbed this, but if you have a question, please make sure to drop it in the Q&A or drop it in the chat. We'll make sure that we grab it. Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you to give us a intro.
Yeah. It's nice to meet all of you. Thanks everybody for showing up today. Today we're going to be talking about how to manage the book of business that you have in front of you, how to work your deals, and ultimately how to get to the truth. And I think this is one of the areas that a lot of salespeople struggle with. And I know I struggled with this one a lot when I was a new salesperson, where when you first start selling, like, there's a very, very strong focus on, I've got to progress this opportunity and sell value and move the deal forward and get my forecast in a great spot. And all of that stuff is true. But what I have found to be most effective for salespeople is to actually shift your focus in your conversations with customers to get to the truth. And the truth may be uncomfortable. The truth might be they're not interested in your product. The truth might be they're absolutely going to renew with their current vendor and you're just column fodder to help negotiate a lower price. The truth might be the person that you're talking to has zero authority to actually make a decision and they know it, but now they're embarrassed to tell you. And the truth is often painful in sales, but your responsibility as a seller is to get to the truth. And that is the number one way to clear junk from your pipeline, so that you can focus on real opportunities. And it is the number one way to uncover the hesitations and reservations and concerns for your real opportunities. So today we're going to talk about things that you can do, say, or write. I'm not going to sit here today and say, oh, you've got to be a great listener or you've got to have empathy. I think everybody here knows that stuff. Instead, let's talk about stuff today that you can do, say, or write immediately to get to the truth and have a very clear understanding of how you need to move your pipeline forward.
I love that. Thank you so much. And I love that we're going to go like with real things that you can apply today. So let's make that real for everybody here. Like, how do you take me through, like, how do you get to the truth? Like, First time, first call.
Yep.
What are you doing?
The foundation of all of this is the principle or the philosophy of if you sense it, say it. Any time that you sense hesitation, concern, worry, objection, pushback from the customer, you need to vocalize the feeling that you have inside of you. And so we're going to talk about that a lot today. And this actually starts all the way with the beginning of your meetings, with the way that you set some folks call it an upfront contract, some people call it an agenda. But let's talk about the very first interaction that you have with a customer, which is usually a discovery call. Okay, so you're going to get on the discovery call, and I think most salespeople know that in the first 3 or 4 minutes, you probably want to address, hey, I've got us down until 12:30 today. That still work for you? And I think the agenda for today was, I had a couple of questions for you. You might have some for me, yada, 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 right? You're going to cover, hey, here's what I think we're going to cover in this meeting. You're going to address the time, etc. What most salespeople don't do here is they do not carve out intentional time and call out to the customer, hey, let's spend some time talking about the truth. And what that might look like is in the beginning of a discovery call, once I've covered the time and the agenda, I might say something like, Marcella, typically these first meetings end up going one of two ways. You might learn a little bit about like what we do and what our offering looks like and decide this isn't a good fit. And if that's the case, that is totally fine. You will not end up hurting my feelings. The other outcome might be you say, hey, this seems moderately interesting. It might be worth continuing to explore. And if that's the case, usually what most folks will want to do is X. And in this scenario, X is whatever your ideal next step is. And so for most folks, it might be, hey, see how this product will help you with your lead routing issue, or, bring your IT team in to do an evaluation of if we can integrate with all the systems you need it to integrate with. Only you know what your sales cycle, like an optimal sales cycle is. And so only you know what X should be. But what you're doing here is you're saying, hey, typically these first meetings end up going one of two ways. You might not like this. And that is okay. And I'm encouraging the customer to, at the end of the call, say, hey, I didn't like it. Fine. Let's figure out why. And we'll talk about that in a second. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, usually this goes one of two ways. We get out, or you say this is worth continuing to explore. And usually the direction folks want to go is this direction.
Mm-hmm.
Then what you say is, given that we have a stop at 12:30 today, would you be all right if we ended 5 or 6 minutes early to talk about whether or not we move to that next step? And 95% of the time, the response you're going to get is absolutely no problem. Okay, what I've done here is I have carved out intentional time to talk about the sales process, the direction that this deal is going to go in. And a lot of sellers hear advice of, you gotta sell value. You've got to be a great listener. That stuff is true. And you do need to spend time in that meeting listening and asking discovery questions and selling value. But if you don't also carve out time to sell the process that folks need to follow, you're missing a lot of the mark. So what will happen there? So I'm just going to do a playback of what happens. So you're in the beginning of the meeting, you cover the agenda and the time. And then you say something like, Marcella, typically these meetings end up going one of two ways. You might not like what you see today. If that's the case, no worries. You won't hurt my feelings. Just let me know and I'll be on my way. The other outcome might be you say, hey, this sounds relatively interesting. Cool. If that's the case, most folks will want to go and do X step. Given that we've got to stop at 12:30, are you cool if we end a couple minutes early? They'll most of the time say yes. About 5 or 6% of the time, they'll say, you know what, Nick? Actually, I don't think that's the next step we would need to take. Before we see a demo, we really need to understand what your integrations look like. Or I at least need to understand what a ballpark range of pricing is going to be. They are going to say a lot of different things in that scenario. The key here is I'm giving them an opportunity to disagree with what my proposed next step is early. And now I can spend some time talking about, okay, you need to understand integrations. That's clearly important to you. Instead of what most salespeople will do is they get on that discovery call, they cover the time, they cover the agenda, and then they get right into the discovery call. And then with a minute and 15 seconds remaining in the meeting, when that CIO is looking at their watch being like, I got to get to another meeting, the rep says something like, so what are next steps? And now you've put this massive mental burden on the other person at the last minute, and you overwhelm them. And that's part of the reason a lot of people get pushback. What I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, we're going to make a decision at the end of this call. And it might be that you don't want this thing, and that's okay. But you also have to carve out the appropriate time. And so what I'm doing is I am intentionally surfacing, it's okay to tell me no. And I'm also surfacing, we're going to spend some time talking about where we go from here, because that's almost as important as the value of this thing. I just monologued at you a lot. That coffee was going through my veins.
You did a great job with that coffee. No, but I love that because you're giving your prospect or the person on the other side license to just tap out. Hey, this isn't really what I'm looking for, and you're setting the expectation of this is how we're going to spend our time, right? You're it's like you've got an agenda, but you're drawing them in and having them participate in creating that agenda. And that's so important because it's not just hey, this is what I want to get out of it. You're drawing them in. I want you to get what you need out of this too, right? Yes. And I think that's so important in making sure that they're part of this plan. You're creating the success plan and mutual action plan together. So that's incredible.
Well, one thing I want to call out about you're giving an opportunity to tap out is what will often happen is you'll run into this time and time and again when you solicit the no. Rob put it in the chat. He said, always get your bad news early. Yes. When I get that bad news early, so let's say I get towards the end of the meeting, there's 6 minutes left, and I go, all right, we talked in the beginning about if you don't like this, totally fine, just let me know, or do you want to keep exploring this? Folks might say, you know what, Nick, I liked what you showed me, but one of the things we really need is we need a forecasting element of this solution, and you didn't show that to me today, and so I don't think this is going to work for us. Well, from selling outreach, I know I get help with forecasting, and maybe I just didn't show that because I couldn't show everything in that demo, right? Or I didn't talk about it at all in the discovery call because that's not where the conversation went. Well, here's an opportunity for me to correct their misconception, because the other person's perception is the truth, it's reality, but it doesn't always mean it's right. They might say, we really like your thing, but we want something that's integrated with a call recording tool. Oh, well, actually, I feel kind of silly, Mr. Customer or Mrs. Customer. I didn't even mention A, B, and C. Is it worth me sharing a little bit about how we might help with what you just said? So what I need to do is solicit the no, solicit their hesitation, solicit the objection, because unless I know about it, unless they voice it, I can't address it. And so part of the reason, if you sense it, you say it, is so important is I used to lose so much sleep over my deals, where I would wake up at 3 a.m. thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so worried that I know the person I'm talking to isn't really at power, and I know I need to talk to this person. And I told my boss, I think we're going to get the deal, and my stomach would be churning. And then I learned, well, gosh, when that stuff comes up, I just need to say it to the customer. So the next time that I meet with that person, I need to say, you know what, Marcella, I feel a little uncomfortable saying this, but usually when folks are evaluating our thing, the CFO is one of the people that will be involved in just taking a look at us from a due diligence perspective. And I'm a little worried that we haven't talked to Mark at all. Do you feel like I'm missing something, or do you think we might want to involve him? Boom.
I love that approach. That's awesome.
I'm taking all of that internal fear and anxiety and worry that all of us hold around selling. Every single person holds it inside of them. When instead, when you actually voice it to the customer and use the language that I just said, where it's like, I feel a little uncomfortable saying this. That's actually a good thing, because I think a lot of sellers have this picture in their head of what a great salesperson is. And it's someone that is tall and good looking and has a lot of bravado and confidence. And I'm 5'7" and not very good looking, and I feel uncomfortable a lot of times in sales calls. And so it's okay to voice when you feel uncomfortable, because what will often happen is the buyer will swoop in and save you. And they'll say, no, Nick, you don't have to feel awkward asking that question. You're right. I didn't think that we would need to involve Mark, but I guess tell me, what do you think we should cover with him? I want to be respectful of the CFO's time. Okay, cool. Now I can have a conversation with my buyer about how to get that CFO involved, and I'll get my sleep back the next night because I've addressed that concern that exists.
And, that's so important. I feel like, you don't have to present yourself like I know everything, but you're a human talking to a human. And and if I'm sitting on the other side of that call, I'm thinking, well, yeah, I want to have a very transparent, honest conversation with this other human being. And so I feel like that's a really real way to get to that humanity, so that's awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I have to ask this because as someone who has taken cold calls, how many times, let's all be honest, have you gotten a buyer who didn't know what you did, but they just took the call because it was like, oh, this is a great outreach, and whatever you said, like that single line in your cold outreach, well, that sounds good. I don't even know what you do.
Happens a lot.
The truth, right?
It's something that I've been working on more also, where a lot of times someone will have maybe a very high level understanding of what you do, or you're right, there's great outreach, but let's actually talk again about the beginning of that call before we even do that one of two ways thing. The first thing that I'm doing when I get on a call with a customer, a first call with a customer, is I want to figure out why the heck they're there. Why did they take the call?
Right.
And so the way that I'll typically voice it over is I might say, Marcella, thanks for meeting with me today. I have to imagine that there's a lot of people that ask for your time and want to meet with you. And my guess is you don't meet with every single one of them. I guess, what prompted you to take this call with me? What I'm doing now is I'm handing the mic to the other person for a second, because they could give me all sorts of answers. They might say, I don't even know. Your BDR called me and they had a pretty good cold call opener, and I agreed to the meeting. I don't even know what you do. Okay, well, I'm going to run that call very, very differently than if they say, yeah, actually I use you at my past 2 companies, and frankly, I want to sign up for 42 seats. Can you help me figure out the fastest way to do that? Those are totally different calls.
Right.
The latter, usually it ends up being somewhere in the middle, where it's like, yeah, I think I saw something on LinkedIn about how you guys can help with forecasting and sales cycles, and that's sort of all I know. Okay, now I know the place that they are coming from, and now I can run my call in a different way than if they know everything about me or if they know nothing about me. From there, what I usually want to do is I want to, I want to figure out why they took the call. And then from there, what I want to do, and this depends on the answer that they give. If they say, I used you before, you can skip this step. But from there, what I want to do is I almost want to pulse check and be like, hey, usually these calls they go different ways depending upon how much you know about 30 Minutes to President's Club. I guess, how much do you know? And it's perfectly fine if the answer is nothing other than I'm talking to you. What I can do here is, again, I'm calibrating to how much they know. So I'm figuring out why they took the call. Because they might just say, yeah, we're looking for a forecasting tool. Okay, great. This call typically is dictated by how much you know about us, and I want to make sure I'm not re-explaining stuff you already know. I guess, how much do you know about outreach? Boom, they say, not very much. Great, let me give you the 60-second primer. Or, yeah, I know a ton about you guys. I've used you before. Again, I'm trying to, early in that call, calibrate to the other person's level of understanding about what my thing does, because I don't want to drag them through the mud of asking questions that they're like, where are these even coming from? I don't know what you do. And I also don't want to ask questions that are far too high level if they're like, I've already used this and I just want to buy the dang thing. So upfront, I want to do as much calibration as possible, because again, that will dictate where the rest of the call goes.
And I love that line about like, hey, if I got a call and your BDR just had a great cold outreach, right? Then you could really dive in and see like, well, there was something that one line or whatever must have agitated some type of pain, and you can really deep dive into that pain, right? And really like focus on it for the call. So I really love that. And okay, I've got a couple other questions too. I want to make sure.
Okay.
We talked about for this call that we were going to learn how to multi-thread. Can you tell me how to multi-thread in a way that builds momentum for a deal?
Yes. So multi-threading it's part of the sales process piece, and it's part of that carve out that we talked about at the end of the meeting. And so in order to multi-thread, there's a couple stage gates you need to pass through. So what I might do is, if I'm in a meeting and I go, okay, the next place I want to get to is multi-threading in this deal. I'm talking to a director of sales and I want to go talk to the director of sales ops. That's the next person that I know I probably need to speak with in my sales process. I'm going to weave that into the upfront contract element of this as the potential next step. And so I might be at, let's say we've done that great discovery call. We're at a place. Mike said I'm describing an application of neuroscience. I don't consider myself a neuroscientist, but I'm so happy that you are calling that out, Mike. Thank you. I might say something like, hey, okay, we did a great discovery call. We're here at a demo. Hey, Marcella, good to see you again. Excited to show you this demo. I think we have an hour carved out. Is that right? Cool. Yep. And I recall from our last meeting, I'm looking at my notes. You wanted to see how we could help get your AEs a bunch more opportunities on their calendar and help you forecast a little bit better so you can roll stuff up to the board. Is that the main two things that you wanted to cover today? Yep. That sounds great to me, Nick. Cool. Frankly, demos like this end up going one of two ways. You might end up seeing what we do and say, hey, that's not going to work for us. And if that's the case, totally fair. You won't hurt my feelings. The other outcome might be you say, hey, this actually looks like it might be able to help. If that's the case, usually what folks will want to do next is most folks will want to have their sales ops team take a look at this to understand how we're going to be able to integrate with your CRM and a bunch of the other technical elements of how this works. I guess, given that we've got to stop in 53 minutes, would you be cool if we ended a couple minutes early to talk about whether or not we end up having a meeting with, I think Mike heads up your sales op team. Is that right? Now, what I have to do here is I have to look up ahead of time on LinkedIn who that person is, but now I make it easy for them and they get that connection in their mind. Maybe I am a neuroscientist, Mike.
I know, yeah.
But what I'm doing is, again, I'm saying up front, hey, I'm going to ask you to multi-thread at the end. What I shouldn't be doing is waiting to the last 2 minutes and saying, cool. So the next step would be to go talk to Mike in sales ops. And they're like, whoa. I wasn't even thinking about that. Because what I do when I bring it up in the beginning of the meeting is now I give them the rest of that hour, the whole time to think, is this something that I want to put in front of Mike? Is this something that I want to involve my team with? And what you will find is that you have a more engaged buyer who is going to scrutinize you more deeply. And that might sound like a bad thing, but what this person is doing now is they're thinking, is this something that warrants Mike's attention? And so I want them to scrutinize me because I want them to get to the truth. You're not doing a good enough job of this if you get to the end of your sales cycle, and that's when you get a boatload of questions. I want the hard questions as early as possible. Rob said it earlier, get to the bad news early. And so I want them to be like, well, I want you grilling me. Obviously, I don't want this to go terribly, but I want you grilling me and asking me the questions that validate in your mind, is this worth putting in front of Rob or Mike, whatever their name is, our imaginary sales ops person.
Imaginary, yeah.
But we're not done. So we get to the end of this meeting now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, I talked about, hey, these go one of two ways. I've got to run what you might call, we call it the 5-minute drill at 30 Minutes to President's Club. And I want to validate 3 things with them. I want to figure out, did you like it? Is that next step the next step we're going to take? And I want to get a general sense around, like, how are we even looking from a timeline perspective? So the meeting ends, right? And in the beginning, I had that, hey, one of two ways talk track. And I might say, all right, I know we're coming up on our last 5 minutes here. I guess, how are you feeling? I don't need to be super formal about, we talked about this was going to go one of two ways. I can just say, like, how are you feeling, right? And hopefully that person gives me some color in their response, where they're either going to say, Nick, I'm frustrated. I wasn't crazy about it, actually. Or I'm not sure, oh, well, tell me more about that. If the answer is no, you won't hurt my feelings. Well, you didn't have any sort of call recording element, and we really need that. Boom, I can address that objection. Most of the time, if I did a good job in my discovery demo, they're going to say, yeah, this looks promising. Okay, cool. I think in the beginning we talked about usually what folks will want to do next is, so what I just did here is I asked, how are you feeling? Because if you have hesitations, Marcella, I don't want to be asking to get multi-threaded to Mike yet, because you have hesitations I need to address. Why on earth would you introduce me to your colleague if you still have hesitations? No, never. So I need to make sure you're feeling good. Once we've gotten to a place of you feel good, now we can talk about, hey, what's the next path? And here's where I call back to what I did in the beginning. In the beginning, I think we talked about what most folks will want to do next is have sales ops take a look at A, B, and C. I think Mike is the person for that. Do you feel like the next thing we should do is have him do this? And most folks will take that path of least resistance, which is the path that you offer. And they'll say, sure, great. Would you be open to making an introduction to him? They'll say yes. What I can do from here is I've addressed you want this thing, or at least you feel good enough to continue looking at this thing. We've talked about what the next step is. And then I have an opportunity to talk timeline and other logistics of the evaluation. And so I might do a little bit of foreshadowing. And so I might say, cool, I'm looking forward to meeting with Mike. I'll keep my eye out for that email introduction from you later. Usually those meetings with sales ops end up going one of two ways. Mike might take a look at this thing and say, hey, it doesn't have what we need from an integration perspective. And if that's the case, we won't be able to fix those things. So we'd rather figure out now than later. The other outcome might be they give us the green light on that front. Usually what folks will want to do from there, once our, the head of sales, somebody like you feels good and, sales ops is checked off on this, is X. And X is now whatever I want to have happen after sales ops. And so it might be, they want a broader demo with the team to show it how that will help them with their workflow, or they'll want the CFO to take a look for a business case. You know your sales cycle better than I know your sales cycle. But what I can tell you is what I'm doing is I'm foreshadowing, hey, after the meeting with Mike, here's where we end up going. And so what I'm doing is I'm talking about things in terms of 1, 2, 3 steps ahead consistently. I'm never leaving the other person guessing about where we're going. And I am consistently, because I'm giving them some space between asking them to make the decision and when I'm telling them that the decision is coming, it eases this pressure off of people, and they're more likely to say yes and help you get there, and they'll give more thought to their decision. And an analogy might be is, Marcella, if you are one of my acquaintances who maybe, we're sort of friends, but I can only deal with you in limited doses, and you hit me up all the time to get lunch, right? And frankly, this would be me asking you, but Anyways, and you hit me up every week to get lunch. I'm eventually going to be like, no, I'm busy. I've got stuff going on. So sorry, cancel at the last minute. But if you say, hey, Nick, next month or in July, I'm having a birthday party, or would you be open to get lunch in July? Like when I defer that decision out, people are more likely to be like, I don't have to deal with it right now. She's not asking me to get lunch tomorrow. I'm more likely to say yes to the thing. Again, none of this is about trapping or tricking the other person, but it is about making it as easy as possible for them to make those decisions without being under pressure.
Mm.
And when I say, hey, I'm after that meeting with sales ops, most folks want to do X. I'm telling them this decision is coming, but the pressure's not there yet. Know that it's coming. Take time to get comfortable with it. Know that it's coming, but this isn't a high pressure situation. By the way, Joel, thank you for your nice comment. And yes, Marcella, if you asked me to get lunch, I would certainly say yes.
Thank you. Finally. But Nick, I don't know what you're talking about here. It does sound a little bit like rocket surgery. I mean, because you're making connections and you're thinking about like how a buyer like thinks through this process, maybe not consciously, but like how they're approaching like making decisions under pressure and deferring that decision even for that next meeting. But I also like hearing you think, boy, the worst possible outcome of that first meeting is not to get scrutinized, right? Because now you're setting the expectation of like thinking, here's the process, maybe 2 or 3 steps down the line, and you're making that person like the sieve of information for like the entire organization. And so now they think like, okay, I have to get this ready for Mike. And so now I'm paying attention to things that Mike might be interested. And now I'm thinking about what do I need to ask before we get in front of Mike, before we get in front of whoever, privacy, security, legal, whatever, what's that primer that I just need, like table stakes. And so I think that's incredible. And so what's the, like, if you, let's say, for instance, you get somebody who's like, no, I loved it. This was the most incredible thing. Because, a lot of buyers, you agitate that pain, you give them this great solution. Like a lot of times outreach is like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we need for our sales team. And they're just like not thinking through the issues. Like, how do you probe them to like go a little deeper? Like, hey, I know this sounds great, but what concerns do you have? Like what language would you use there?
Well, okay. So what I had described was a scenario where you've got someone who likes your thing at the end of the meeting. You just described someone who loves your thing at the end of the meeting. You just described someone who we might call a champion. Marcella sees this and says, holy cow, this thing's going to get me not just 1, but 2 promotions if we buy this. I'm going to look like the hero of the entire company. They're going to mention me at sales kickoff because I bought this thing. Okay, now I go from Marcella's sort of on my side to Marcella's a champion. How do we sell this thing together? And so what I want to do here is, well, first, let's pause. Marcella just said, I loved this thing. Well, that makes me really happy to hear. I showed you a lot today. What did you like the best? Talk to me, right? I want to pull out. What did you like? Tell me more. Tell me more. Tell me more. When people are in that emotional state where they're gushing and they love this thing, I want to pull to figure out, like, I want that good feeling to continue. I want you to feel heard. Because if I go, okay, cool, get me in front of Mike, it's like, I don't care. That's demonstrating to you that I don't care how you feel. And I got to show a little bit I got to reciprocate, right? I need to reciprocate. You're at a high emotional state. You feel phenomenal. Well, great. Awesome. Tell me more. Let's get each other hyped up a little bit. Now what I need to do is, at this point, I might whip out a mutual action plan even. And I might say, okay, cool. Usually what folks will want to do next is have sales ops take a look and validate some stuff. And, I don't know if it would be helpful for you, Marcella, but I have it listed out, usually the steps folks will take when they're evaluating a thing like outreach. Would it be helpful if I shared my screen real quick and showed you the 5 or 6 steps that most folks will take in their evaluation of us to get this thing implemented? Well, if Marcella loved this thing, she's going to be like, heck yeah, cool. Now I can pull up this mutual action plan and I can talk about all of those steps. So I'm not just talking about, hey, here's the next thing, because I think the difference is when you have someone who likes your thing, I don't want to overwhelm them yet with, hey, here's all the things you got to do. But if I have someone who loves this thing and really wants to champion this product or purchase, now they're no longer in a place where they're maybe a little bit resistant to all of those steps. So I'm pulling up, hey, here's all of the things most folks will want to do. And now what I can start to do is you're sold. You're in I love listing. And yes, I could drill and say, well, what didn't you like? Or what hesitations do you have, Marcella? But because you're already a green light, I want to figure out the people who might be reds and yellows and figure out how to get them to green. Said differently, I don't necessarily need to make your green light stronger. I can do that by making you look good, by having really prepared meetings with other people in the organization, coming back to you and saying, hey, I met with Mike in sales ops. His big 3 things were A, B, and C. Hey, by the way, did you know we're going to solve this problem for him? And you're going to say, holy cow, I didn't know that. I'm going to look even better. I'm going to get 3 promotions now, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, you feel really good about this thing. Maybe it makes sense to talk about the full context of what folks will do in this eval. I'm going to pull it up. Let's talk about, when I meet with Mike, every sales ops person is a little bit different. Could you give me a sense of some of the things that he's going to care about the most? And you're going to say, boom, boom, boom. And I'm going to say, one common concern that I hear from sales ops people is X. Do you think that's something that he might be concerned about or have an opinion on? Well, I'm going to get your idea on that. And now what we can start to do is game plan for each of these meetings together. And so I will do that for each of my steps in said sales process. I'll say, we're going to do this thing. Let's talk about what concerns. What does that person care about? Boom, boom, boom. And I'm consistently doing these things because you are my champion now. And I want to use, you want this thing. And so we're no longer on a separate side of the table. I'm trying to sell you. You're trying to vet this thing. We're now on, how do we get this thing done together? And so I think where a lot of salespeople struggle is they don't empower their champion or enable their champion or unlock their champion to their full potential. I do that by saying, here's the entirety of what folks will do. And let's talk about each component and how we can make sure we nail each component. And again, let's go all the way back to the beginning of getting to the truth. I want to figure out if we're going to meet with sales ops and Mike is a hard-nosed jerk. I want to know that, right? I want to know. Sorry, Mike, I don't think you're a hard-nosed jerk. I'm sure you're a nice guy, but I want to make sure that I'm prepped for that meeting, right? If I'm going to be meeting with one of your colleagues, your head of sales development, and that person used to work at the competitor of what I'm selling, I want to know that. I need to get to the truth so that I can address these things. And I need to get to the truth as early as possible. And I do that by asking and being okay if the truth is uncomfortable.
That's great. And I sorry, I've got to jump way back here because Aubrey put a question in the Slack and I didn't want to forget it. She asked, do you ever solicit the objections at the beginning by listing items that might interest them before you start the meeting?
So I think the way that you do that is, I don't necessarily know if you solicit objections with those things. And so the way that I might do that is using what I call typically language. And that's how I'll usually rattle off things that the other person might be interested in as a way to prime them for the direction we want to take the conversation in. And so I might say, in the beginning, we've talked about, I figured out, okay, why'd you take the call? We did a quick pulse check of here's sort of what we do. And then what I need to do is transition to, typically when I'm meeting with a CFO, the 2 things that they really care about are A and B. And A and B are both problems that I or my product and service solves. So, typically when I'm meeting with a CFO of an intellectual property law firm, what they tell me is that typically they're focused on making sure that they get their partner billing up because there's a lot of pressure on rates right now, or I haven't sold to law firms in a long time, so I'm botching the typically problems. But I want to lead with 2, hey, here's problems we solve. When I'm selling 30 Minutes to President's Club, and folks want to advertise with this, I might say, hey, typically when I'm meeting with the CMO, the 2 things that they're focused on in working with us is there's a bunch of sales teams that don't even know you exist, and they want to make sure that every sales team out there knows what you do and how you help sellers. And then the other thing folks are usually focused on is, hey, you've got pipeline goals to hit, and frankly, you won't hit them running the same playbooks from 2021 and 2022. I don't know to what extent those are things that you're focused on, but I thought I'd start with what most folks are focused on when they're meeting with me. What I'm doing here is I'm almost priming them or seeding them with, hey, here's usually what folks are focused on. Does that sound like you at all? And so I've sort of teased the problems. What I'm not doing, Aubrey, is I'm not listing items that might interest them, because they don't care about items. They care about problems. I'm listing problems and the problems that they might want to solve. And so what might happen is they might say, hey, those actually aren't the things I'm focused on, Nick. I'm focused on our marketing infrastructure. Well, I'm not helping with that. Okay, now we know, right? I want to figure out, so I want to sort of tease, hey, here's what we help with or the problems we solve, and figure out, is that right? Hopefully that helped, Aubrey.
That's awesome. Thank you. Great feedback. Thank you. And you know what? Joel K, he says, Nick, how do you send a did I do something wrong email to someone that went MIA without sounding needy?
Okay. So step one is, this is if you're getting ghosted, right? If someone's disappeared. The number one way to unghost is to use the magic device called the phone. And step one is don't send that email. Step one is call them. Most of the time, you'll get an answer. Leave a voicemail, call them, say, hey, send them an email. I just tried to call you at the office. Let me know when you get a minute to reconnect, right? I'm going to call them once. Maybe I'll call them twice. If I don't hear back, the next thing that I'm going to do is, and I'll email after the calls, hey, I just tried to get in touch with you. Are you still focused on solving X? If not, no worries. Totally fine, right? At that point, if I haven't heard back from this person, if at any point I have touched another person in the sales process, so Marcella disappears on me. I call her a couple times, I email, nothing. Okay, maybe I'm going to go and I'm going to call Mike. I'm going to say, hey, Mike, I'm trying to get a hold of Marcella. If you recall, you and I talked a couple weeks ago about outreach and ABC. Do you know what happened? I hope everything's okay. I certainly don't want to be a pest if this wasn't something that you all were continuing to look at, right? My goal is to try to say anyone that I've touched, I have a right to get in contact with. I'm not being rude. I'm not saying, wow, Marcella's so irresponsible. She didn't respond to me. You guys were evaluating my thing and we haven't heard back. Okay, I might touch a couple other people. Again, use the phone. Do not rely just on email. If after 3.5 weweeks, you've not gotten an answer, you've gotten your answer. Move on.
Yep.
Go contact other people. Maybe give yourself a reminder in outreach to ping that person in 6 months. But what a lot of salespeople do is they obsess over following up and checking in, and they want to hold on so tightly to that opportunity. And it's part of the reason folks do that is because prospecting is really, really hard. It is much easier to take your 38 stagnant opportunities that haven't responded to you in weeks and follow up and check in and spend 92 minutes following up and checking in and calling them and trying to get them to respond. Much easier to do that than to reallocate those 38 calls to new prospects. That's really tough to do, to reallocate that energy, but that is what you should do. And for some reason, we don't get the message as sellers, where if I ask Marcella 38 times if she wants to get lunch with me, and she says no every single time, I should eventually get the message, Marcella doesn't want to get lunch with me. But we're not getting that message as salespeople. If Marcella says no to me 38 times, it's time for me to make some new friends. And that's hard.
Yeah.
But that's the right thing to do versus punching them in the face repeatedly and blowing up their inbox. And it's not that it's annoying. Like, I think there's a lot of people on LinkedIn that rant about, oh, this is annoying that sellers do this and you shouldn't do that. Don't be a pest. Well, it's also ineffective. It's so ineffective. Your job is to get to the truth and your job is to make an impact for your business. Quit reading the stuff where it says, oh, it takes 32 touches to re-engage a buyer who's gone dark on you. Well, look, they got your email. Call someone else. I'll get off my soapbox. I'm sorry. I've been guilty of it.
My husband always says you have to straddle the line between pest and persistence. And sometimes I know I can be a pest, but I'm also thinking about myself, like being, hey, I'm a mom of 2. I'm busy. I'm working from home and home from work and doing all these things. And it's like, I know if it's important to me, it's on my to-do list. And every time I see an email pop up from Nick, I'm like, oh, I got to respond to Nick, and it's not like it's, like I'm not consciously just trying to ghost you, but I just can't deal with it at the moment,
Yep.
And so I feel like you're absolutely right. Like, yeah, you have to be persistent, but at some point it's like, okay, if it's important to them, it's on their to-do list and they will get back to you, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're still in the running, you're still on that list, the short list.
The other thing folks will end up getting is like when you follow up and follow up and follow up, 9 times out of 10, the responses you get is, hey, this is still something we're thinking about. Thanks so much for being persistent. Please check back with me in 2 weeks. That's not a hot op. That's not moving. That's not painful enough. So just like sort of inching along these like slow rollers is not, don't get me wrong, I don't want to lose touch with that person, but reinvest your emotional energy elsewhere. One email you can send, Joel, you put, how do I send it? I do something wrong. Language that I'll often use is something along the lines of, hey, Joel, I pinged you earlier about the initiative regarding X. I'm getting the sense this isn't something that you guys are still pursuing. Mind giving me a heads up? I certainly don't want to be a pest if this is something that you guys are not focused on. I want to call out the fact that, like, I know I've been pretty dang persistent and I don't want to be a pest. So call it out. And that's usually my approach with these things.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I in the same vein, and sorry if I'm about to butcher your name, Kava, they asked in the same, not in the same vein. Is it good sense to solicit objection by asking at the end of the demo what you like least about what you saw today?
That is not typically a question that I ask. And part of the reason for that is when somebody vocalizes something, it becomes far more real to them. And so when I get someone talking about the things that they liked, because they vocalized it, it's like if you have a goal. If I tell Marcella, my goal next week is to eat 5 servings of vegetables every single day, I have a higher likelihood of like being compliant with that goal. And it's more important to me because it doesn't live in just my head anymore. I've said it out loud to the other person. And so when you vocalize things, they become more real and you want to stick to those things. And so I don't want to send somebody down the rabbit hole of, well, I guess it depends on their tenor at the end of the meeting. So at the end of the meeting, first, I want to pulse check. How you feeling? I know we've only got a couple minutes left. Based on that response, I can go a couple different directions. If Marcel is gushing and she loves this thing, okay, let's keep talking about the stuff that you loved. Let's do the mutual action plan approach. If she's happy and she liked this thing, I want to go for the multi-thread ask or move to that next step ask. If she's sort of ambivalent, or I can tell she's not happy with it, right? So this isn't the good outcome. What I want to do here is instead of saying, what did you like least? What I want to do is I want to go all the way back to what we talked about in the beginning, which is if you sense it, say it. Marcella, thank you for being here today. I'm sort of getting the sense that you weren't crazy about what we showed me, or I'm sort of getting the sense that I might have missed the mark with my demo today. I guess, am I crazy or am I reading things right? What I want to do is I do want to solicit the objection if I sense it. If I sense they didn't like it, then the answer to that question is yes. If I sense that they loved it because you're showing me that you loved it, I don't need to go down that direction. It's a better use of our collective time together to talk about hesitations and reservations that other people will have.
That's great. Thank you so much. Now, it's 12:48, so I want to make sure I get this last one in. We talked about what tactics do you use to get junk out of your pipeline? So you can focus on the real opportunities. Like that was one of the things we talked about. And take us through like maybe some real life examples. Like what do you specifically say or do to do that?
We've talked about a lot of this stuff here. So we talked about in those last 6 minutes of the meeting, how did you feel? Okay. Ambivalent. Yeah, it was pretty good. I think I'll probably need to get back with the team, collect some information and get back with you. That to me, ding, 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 hesitation. Hey, no worries. Marcella, do you mind if I ask you sort of a weird question? Go ahead, Nick. Usually when folks say something like that at the end of the meeting, it might be because they weren't crazy about the demo that I showed, or they feel like, hey, this isn't going to specifically solve the problems you had to a strong enough extent. I guess, am I totally crazy with that? Is that sort of how you're feeling? If this isn't something you want to keep pursuing, like totally fair, you won't hurt my feelings. Based on the answer there, I can now calibrate and figure out, is this thing real or not? What I need to do at the end of every single meeting is I have to pulse check. How are you feeling? If you feel good, let's spend time talking about how we keep this thing moving forward. If you don't feel good, if you say it or if I sense it, I need to spend talking about what's making you not feel good. Because one of two things will happen when I go down that road of exploring why you don't feel good. Either you're going to share objections or hesitations that I legitimately can address. Nick, I just feel like this thing isn't a fit because you don't have a call recording aspect. Oh, I feel like a dummy. We actually do, and I think I screwed up and didn't show it to you. Do you want me to show it to you? Boom, I have a chance to fix their misconception that was causing them to want to opt out of the sales process. The other outcome is, Nick, your call recording tool that you showed me does not meet the specific criteria that we need. Okay, that might not be a real opportunity for me because I can't actually solve the problem that they have. Now, should I not buy something because of the call recording not meeting things? I don't know. Maybe I'll pull them back but you told me the biggest problem was forecasting. We don't need to get down into those nuances, but I need to have an open and honest exploration of if somebody is opting out of the sales process, either verbally or non-verbally, you can sort of feel it. I have to explore it. Because if I don't explore it, that's when I end up having junk in my pipeline where you decide to circle back with the team and I follow up and I check in. So always forcing myself to get to the truth is the number one way to do it. And you do that at the end of every single interaction. You do it during the interaction.
Good question, Rob.
Rob has a great question. How do you suspect your column fodder? I think it is one of those you sense it things. And oftentimes it comes from a place of, if you think about, so for folks who don't know what column fodder is, if I am evaluating, let's say I'm a CRO and I'm evaluating outreach and a couple outreach competitors for my company. If I'm evaluating that, what I might do is I might send our junior sales ops manager to go investigate a couple things and come back with some information. And what that person likely does is they put together a spreadsheet with, does it have X feature? How many seats do I need to buy at minimum? And how long does implementation take? Very basic, high-level questions. And you can suspect your column fodder when someone is not going down the road of exploring solving problems, and instead they are asking you very targeted questions that fit into a spreadsheet. Another way to think about it is, most sales, when you're not column fodder, there's context around all of this. You've got someone saying, our org is growing by 15%. We've got really big sales goals next year and we've got to find a way to hit them. And I understand you guys can help our AEs create and close more opportunities this year. Okay, let's have a conversation around that. Versus, how many licenses do I need to buy? How long does it take to implement? If someone's just asking you questions versus, it's not bad for the buyer to ask you questions, but they shouldn't, those are ones that are not related to the big problem. So I think that's sort of the first piece of how you can suspect that you're column fodder. It is a much deeper discussion in terms of how do you reorient the conversation from that perspective.
And does that give you opportunity though, if you're column fodder, like, oh, okay, I just need to make sure I've got, 3 options here. I do the check marks, but hey, they also introduced me to some features that I didn't even know about. Like maybe column fodder, just making sure that you check all the boxes, just the bare minimums.
Yep.
That gives you the in, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to be a jerk to that person, but you're right. There's a lot of things you need to do. Like, okay, hey, you asked me about A, B, and C. It's interesting. You didn't ask me about forecasting, and that's usually a component that folks are interested in. I want to start to introduce differentiators into the sales process also. Kevin asked a question to the hosts and panelists chat, so not all of you will see it. He said, how do you differentiate a prospect that is happy with the status quo versus unable or afraid to make a decision?
Great question, Kevin.
How do you differentiate a prospect that is happy with the status quo? They are happy with how things are today versus someone who is unable or afraid to make a decision. Okay, so happy with the status quo, when I get to the end of that meeting, that's why I need to pulse check with the individual that I'm working with first. Because if I get to the end of that demo and I'm asking Marcella, how do you feel? I can start to, she might say, it was good, but it wasn't that different than what we're doing today. Okay, this is someone that's happy with the status quo. I didn't do a great job with my discovery or with my demo, et cetera. And I might call that out. Gosh, I'm shocked because usually when I talk to folks that are using X, the big things that they call out are different around outreach are A, B, and C. And I think I did a really crummy job showing that to you today. I guess I know your time is valuable, but would you be open to me giving me a second shot for 15 minutes to show you the things that I think really are different about what you do here? At this point, the ops probably lost because I showed a crummy demo. Very few people will say yes there, but at the end of that meeting, I pulse check to figure out how are you feeling, and if they're happy with the status quo, we need to explore that before we talk about where we go from here. But if I get to the end and they are happy, or they do feel good about my thing, they feel our thing is better than the status quo. Okay, now we can talk about where we go from here. And that's when you might pull out you're unable to make a decision. Well, that's okay. If you loved this thing, Marcella's gushing about this thing. Look, usually when I talk to a head of sales development, they're usually not the one writing the check for when they buy this thing. Let's talk about how most heads of sales development will navigate buying this. And then we'll go from there. Or they're afraid. Okay, I hear you. This is a big change. Tell me about the last time that you made a big purchase like this. Are you aware of it? I have no idea. I'm scared. Okay, mutual action plan. This is a big thing. You and I might need to do a deeper exploration, Marcella, around how this is actually going to impact your business. Would it make sense for us to talk about this before we involve your sales op team and we go make a business case? The difference is that pulse check at the end tells me the direction I need to go. A pulse check tells me, do I need to spend more time with this person winning them over? Or do we need to spend more time with the organization winning it over? That's why you pulse check at the end.
And I love that question about tell me about the last time you made a big purchase, or maybe they haven't, or
Yep.
If they have made a big purchase and they had hiccups in that process, this killed the deal, then they'll take you through the entire process and you can know, here are all the hurdles that I'm going to have to jump through at some point.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo.
That's great. And I just want to make sure we've got 4 minutes left. Tell me about one sequence to create 5 templates to close. I'm going to drop a link for everybody here to an asset that.
Oh, how kind of you.
Absolutely. Tell us about that.
Sure. Do you want to share it so folks can see the screen?
Oh, I'm going to try. Let me attempt. Because okay, does this go away? I think so. Okay, does anybody see that? How's that?
Beautiful. So one of the things that 30 Minutes to President's Club did with Outreach was Outreach is one of our wonderful sponsors at 30 Minutes to President's Club. And so what we put together was a toolkit for folks that is free that includes our 30 Minutes to President's Club prospecting sequence and email frameworks and templates that you can literally steal and adapt for your own stuff, as well as a number of talk tracks and templates that you can use for when there is risk in your deals. Said differently, a way to get to the truth. And so we've got email templates in there for mutual action plans, or for asking to get to power, or for when you're asking your executive to get in touch with one of their executives to help multithread. And so if you scroll down on your screen a bit, Marcella, you should be able to see that's where you fill it out to go get everything. It's totally free. 30 Minutes to President's Club made it with Outreach. And so enjoy.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I wanted to make sure we got that promoted. But then also one last question, if we have time. Let's see if we can sneak it in with 2 minutes left. Sebastian asks, hey, Nick, how would you multi-thread an account after you've spoken with a contact and find other good contacts to speak with?
I would ask. So I do a bunch of different things. This is a 15-minute answer, but one, if Marcella's sold, I'm like, hey, I was actually thinking about your initiative around A, B, and C. I was looking at Sebastian's profile, and I think he's actually someone that usually is a stakeholder in something like this. Would you be open to introducing me to him so that I can understand A, B, and C and show him D, E, and F that you told me were really important to your org? I'm going to ask. The other thing that I do is when I identify a buying committee, you better believe I connect with all of those people on LinkedIn. And I might say something in my connection request. Hey, I've met with Marcella a couple times. She's awesome. Tell her I say hi. That's it. Now I'm connected with all these people. 92% of them will say yes because I didn't send a spammy connection request and I'm clearly working with a colleague of theirs. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the little LinkedIn bell and follow all of those people. And anytime one of Marcella's colleagues posts, I'm going to go comment on it. I might even send them a message. Hey, that was an awesome post you made last week about your marathon that you ran. Like, I've only ever done a half, but a huge admiration for you, right? I want to do things to start pinging them in a way that is not salesy or spammy, but I want the entire org buying committee to be like, this Nick guy is on top of the game. So hopefully that was helpful, Sebastian. And if you want to multi-thread with me, I just put my LinkedIn in the chat. So feel free
Thank
to
you
send me
so much.
a connection request.
And definitely reach out to Nick, reach out to anybody on the Sales Hacker team. Make sure that you are connected with us. And I was taking notes during this session. I hope everybody else was, but even if you weren't, we're going to send you a recording. So you'll have this. You could share it with anyone and everyone that you think could use this information. And Nick, I appreciate your time so much and sharing your insights with us. If you want to follow the conversation, jump into the community, make sure you start the conversation. We'll probably have a place there where you can, start talking about all the things that we talked about here. But we also have community discussion threads. We're starting up the Sales Hacker podcast again, so make sure you join us there. And then every week we have 2 webinars. Next, I think this Thursday, correct me if I'm wrong, I wrote it down. We're going to have an outreach sponsored webinar on how to create and close more pipeline in 2023, because that's what we're about, creating and closing pipeline. So we hope that you join the Sales Hacker community and help us help you do that. Thank you all for joining us today. I appreciate the time. Look out for the recording. Don't forget to download the ebook.
See you all later. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.